At 75 years old, I sold the house my son thought he had already inherited, and he did not find out until it was too late to stop me. This is the story of how a quiet widow taught her own family that a deed is not a suggestion. My daughter-in-law needs the big bedroom more than you do. That is what my son said to me. At 7:15 on a Wednesday morning, one hand pressed flat against my bedroom door, like he had already measured it for a new lock. I was still in my old cotton robe, the one with the frayed left sleeve. My tea had gone cold on the hallway table, where I had set it down to answer the knock. Behind him, his wife stood holding a fabric swatch against her chest. A soft dove gray, the kind of calm, tasteful color people choose while doing something quietly cruel. "You are 75, Mom," he said. Like my age was a diagnosis. "You do not need all this space anymore. The room by the laundry room would be plenty." "That is my bedroom," I said, and he sighed. The kind of sigh that says he has already decided this conversation is beneath him. "This is a family decision," he said. His wife smiled. Just barely. Just enough for me to see it and know it was meant for me. Something cold moved through my chest then. Not anger. Not yet. Anger has heat, and this had none. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "If you cannot adjust, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." But in my house, the house my husband Walter and I paid off over 32 years of grocery coupons and canceled vacations. The house where I penciled my son's height on the kitchen doorframe every June until he stopped growing. A house whose roof I replaced 2 years ago using $85,000 from the retirement account he once told me was, quote, "more than enough for one old woman living alone." I looked at him, really looked, searching for even a flicker of shame. There was none. He was comfortable. That hurt more than the words did. "Fine," I said. "By the end of the month, everything will be settled." His shoulders dropped with relief. His wife's smile opened all the way. They thought I had surrendered. At 7:22 that morning, I carried my cold tea into the kitchen. My hand shook just once, and then it did not shake again. The first week they were grateful. "Thank you so much, Mom. We will make this work." By the fourth week, my dining table had become his desk. My sewing basket had been exiled to the garage between paint cans, and my husband's photograph, one from our wedding day at the little chapel on Route 9, had disappeared from the hallway shelf. I found it later shoved behind a row of shoeboxes in the coat closet. When I asked about it, my daughter-in-law, whose name is Priya, said the hallway needed, quote, "less visual heaviness." Visual heaviness. That is what she called my husband's face. I put the photograph back on the shelf that same afternoon. By the next morning, it was gone again. I did not confront them. Not yet. Mothers are trained from birth in small surrenders. We call it keeping the peace. We call it not making a scene. We call it helping family. But repeated surrender teaches certain people the wrong lesson entirely. They stop seeing your patience as a gift and start treating it like plumbing. Something permanent, something silent, something that belongs to them by default. But at 9:10 that same morning, after they had left the house to go shopping for a new bed, I called Richard, the attorney who had handled Walter's estate 11 years earlier. "I need to understand exactly what my rights are in my own home," I told him. There was a pause on the line. And then he said, "That sentence usually means someone has made you feel like you do not have any." I nearly cried right there in my kitchen, because he understood so quickly, so completely, without me having to explain a single humiliating detail. Richard asked whether the deed was solely in my name. Yes, he asked whether my son had ever paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, or any major repair. No, not $1 ever. Was there a lease agreement? No. Did they receive mail at the address? Yes. What? Had they been staying there close to 3 months? Yes. Then he told me the first fact that would eventually become the foundation of everything. Ownership and occupancy are two very different legal realities. The deed gives you authority, he said, but removing occupants from a home still requires proper legal notice and proper procedure. Being your son does not make him an owner, and being angry does not let you skip the process. So I cannot simply change the locks, I asked. Not safely, he said, and not smartly. We win this by staying calmer than they expect you to be. Calmer than they expect. I turned that phrase over in my mind for the rest of the day. At 10:30, he emailed me a short checklist, and I printed it and hid the paper inside an old cookbook that no one in that house had opened in years. Confirm the title and the insurance are current. Photograph every room exactly as it stands. Record any items of real value. Put every important decision in writing. Do not threaten, and do not reveal your full plan before it is time. I learned something that week that I never expected to learn at my age. Legal strategy can look exactly like emotional discipline from the outside. You do not answer every insult. You simply preserve the evidence that people create when they believe you are too weak, too old, or too tired to act. But at 4:40 that afternoon, they returned home, carrying furniture catalogs and a roll of fabric samples. My daughter-in-law walked straight into my bedroom without so much as a knock. "We are thinking built-in wardrobes right along this wall," she said, gesturing with her whole arm. "Dresser can go down to the basement storage room." That dresser had belonged to my own mother. It crossed an ocean with her in 1953. "No," I said. She blinked. "No to the dresser," she asked. "No to entering my room without permission," I said. My son appeared in the doorway behind her. "Mom, please do not start," he said. Heat rose into my face. I wanted to list every night I sat beside his hospital bed as a boy, every check I had quietly written for him over the years, every excuse I had made to friends and neighbors when he disappointed me. Instead, I thought of Richard's advice and I said only, "You are right, this is not the time." I said it softly, and I meant it as patience, but his wife mistook it for weakness. People often do. It saves them the trouble of seeing the trap they are standing in until it is already closed. The next morning at 8:20, I met a real estate agent named Vanessa, 6 miles from the house, in a small coffee shop with mismatched chairs. She was warm without being syrupy about it, sharp-eyed, direct in a way I appreciated immediately. "I want to sell quietly," I told her. "How quietly?" she asked. "Quiet enough that the people currently living in my house have no idea what is happening until every part of the process is already secure and irreversible." She explained private marketing to a small list of pre-approved buyers, showing scheduled only when the house was empty, proof of funds requirements, realistic timelines. Because I owned the property outright, I could legally sell it whenever I chose, but because they occupied the property, every single step still had to be handled correctly. The lesson from that meeting was simple and it stayed with me. Power becomes almost impossible to challenge once it follows proper procedure. At 6:10 that evening, dinner was already on the table when I walked in. "We have been talking," my son said. That particular sentence had never once brought me anything good. In 30 years, he slid a printed schedule across the table toward me. Laminated, I noticed. Laminated. The primary bedroom would become theirs. The small room near the laundry would become mine. Den would become his home office. And the dining room would become, quote, shared flexible space, meaning I could use it only when he did not need it. At the very bottom, his wife had typed in bold letters, "Effective this coming Monday." I heard my husband laughing in that dining room somewhere in my memory. I saw my son at 9 years old, asleep on the living room sofa with one sock missing. Memory can be cruel that way. It places the person someone used to be directly beside the person they eventually chose to become. "This is very efficient," my son said. "Efficient." I repeated the word back to him. His wife leaned forward across the table. "You will be so much more comfortable, less walking for you. There are many quiet ways to control an older person, and one of the cruelest is describing every single loss as if it were an act of kindness." I folded the paper carefully and said, "Thank you." They both relaxed visibly. At 9:15 that night, I scanned the laminated schedule and sent it to Richard. His reply came back 11 minutes later. "Keep the original. Do not lose it." Their room schedule was not merely insulting. It was documented intent. They had stopped behaving like grateful guests and had openly begun reorganizing my property around my eventual removal from it. The following week moved quickly after that. At 6:30 on a Thursday morning, while my son was at a job interview across town and his wife had a hair appointment booked for 2 hours, Vanessa arrived with a photographer, and together we worked through the house room by room. I personally removed the family photographs, the medications, the banking documents, everything private and everything irreplaceable. "The primary bedroom has wonderful natural light in the mornings," the photographer said cheerfully. I nearly laughed out loud. Apparently everyone eventually agrees on that particular point. Vanessa also warned me that once the listing quietly went live to her small pool of buyers, word could eventually travel through the neighborhood faster than either of us wanted. And she was right. 3 days later, Doris mentioned over the fence that she had seen an unfamiliar car parked outside early one morning. I simply smiled and said I had been meaning to have the gutters inspected. It surprised me how easily the small, harmless lies came once I understood exactly what they were protecting. Not a secret for its own sake, but a process that needed time to finish properly before anyone could interfere with it. Back at home, the takeover only accelerated. My son ordered a new king-sized bed frame online. His wife taped fresh paint samples directly onto my bedroom wall, and one afternoon they moved 2 of my dresses into the smaller room near the laundry, quote, to help me start adjusting early. When I saw my dresses hanging in that narrow closet, I actually became short of breath for a moment. It was only clothing, I told myself. And yet the message underneath it was unmistakably clear. You are already already displaced here, whether you have agreed to it or not. I sat down on the small bed in that laundry room and genuinely wondered if I was overreacting, whether peace was simply easier, whether a mother at my age was supposed to let go gracefully and without complaint. Then I noticed my husband's photograph again, this time lying completely face down on the dresser, and that quietly ended the internal debate for good. I carried every dress back to my own closet, and that night I locked my bedroom door for the first time in that house. At 5:55, my son found the door locked and knocked hard. "Why is this door locked?" he demanded. "Because it is private," I answered through the door. "We need access to that room," he said. "No," I said calmly. "Want access." His voice sharpened noticeably. "You said everything would be settled by the end of the month. It will be," I said. And then silence. For the very first time, he heard something in my voice that genuinely unsettled him. 2 days later, I overheard him in the kitchen, speaking to his wife in a lowered voice. "Once she finally moves down to the small room, we can start having the real conversation about the deed," he said. My hand froze on the stair railing. The deed. So it had never really been about a bedroom at all. Wife lowered her voice further. "She will agree eventually. You know how much she hates any kind of conflict." That comment hurt, because for most of my life it had been completely true. They were testing my boundaries in careful, deliberate stages. First move a photograph, then take a room, then quietly redefine ownership itself. Every small thing I had tolerated up to that point had simply become permission for the next larger thing. The real lesson in all of this was never that I had been foolish for trusting my own son. The real lesson was that a boundary can begin today. Even when honestly it probably should have begun many months earlier. That weekend, my neighbor Doris, who had lived 2 doors down since before my son was even born, stopped me at the mailbox and asked gently whether everything was all right. She said she had noticed the moving trucks with the paint samples taped to my window, the way I had started walking slower down my own driveway. I told her only that some changes were being made, and she squeezed my hand and said, "Eleanor, whatever you decide, you have never once been a woman who needed permission." That small sentence stayed with me longer than I expected it to. That same weekend, I also drove out to the cemetery where Walter is buried, and I sat on the small stone bench near his marker for almost an hour. I told him about the bedroom, about the dresses moved into the laundry room, about the deed being discussed in whispers in our own kitchen. I do not know if the dead can hear anything at all, but saying it out loud, in that quiet place, made the decision feel less like betrayal and more like protection. On the drive home, I stopped at the bank and quietly moved a portion of my savings into an account with only my name attached to it. A small, unremarkable errand that felt at the time like the first real brick in a wall I had not yet finished building. Back at the house that evening, my son mentioned almost casually that he had already reached out to a contractor about knocking down part of the hallway wall to widen the new primary bedroom closet. He did this without asking me, without so much as glancing in my direction for approval. As though the walls themselves already belonged to someone else. I said nothing that night. I simply wrote the date and the comment down in a small notebook Richard had told me to keep. A plain spiral notebook I hid inside my sewing basket long before it was exiled to the garage. That notebook eventually held 11 separate entries, each one a small sentence or decision made without my consent, each one on its own, forgettable. But together they told a very clear story about 2 people who had stopped asking and started assuming. At 8 that Monday morning, I sat across from Richard and signed the purchase agreement Vanessa had prepared. My signature looked small and shaky on the page, and yet it quietly changed the future of everyone living inside that house. Richard prepared the formal occupancy notice with the correct dates, the correct legal wording, and the correct method of delivery. No accusations anywhere in it, no dramatic threats, only plain, unavoidable facts. The property had been sold. Occupancy would legally end on the stated date, and all personal belongings needed to be removed by that same date. "Can I hand the notice to him myself?" I asked. "Yes," Richard said, "but bring a witness and send a second copy by trackable mail as well." Important conversations, he told me, have a strange habit of being quietly rewritten later by the people who did not want to hear them. Documentation protects the truth once memory becomes convenient for someone. At 7:30 that evening, my son and his wife opened a bottle of sparkling cider in the kitchen to celebrate the delivery date for their new bed frame. His wife held up her dove gray paint sample one more time and announced happily, "We are calling it Quiet Morning." I nearly laughed again. Life apparently does have a sense of humor after all. "Sit down," I said. "Can this wait until tomorrow?" My son asked. "No," I said, "it cannot." Vanessa was already waiting quietly in the living room as my witness. I placed 2 sealed envelopes down on the kitchen table. My son opened his first. Confusion crossed his face, then genuine disbelief, then something like fear trying very hard to disguise itself as anger. "What exactly is this?" he demanded. The house has been sold, I told him plainly. His wife let out one short, disbelieving laugh. That is not possible. My agreement is fully complete, I said. The dates are clearly stated in your copy of the notice. You sold our home, my son said. Our home. He heard the word leave his own mouth, and I watched him realize his mistake, half a second too late. I told you to go find somewhere else to live, I said quietly. So I did. His wife pushed the notice away across the table. We are not going anywhere. Vanessa stepped forward calmly and said, the legal requirements and the deadline are stated very clearly in that document. My son turned on me fully then. You planned every part of this behind our backs, he said. Yes, I answered, and my simple honesty seemed to stun him more than any argument could have. How could you possibly do this to family? He asked. Family, used as nothing but a rope thrown, only when he happened to be the one falling. My hands were trembling under the table by then, so I folded them together in my lap. Family does not empty a widow's bedroom without asking, I said. Family does not discuss her deed behind her back while she can still hear it. Family does not tell a 75-year-old woman to find somewhere else to live in the home she personally paid for. His wife's whole expression shifted the moment I mentioned the deed. You heard us, he whispered. I heard more than enough, I said. He paced the kitchen floor, talking quickly now. We had nowhere else prepared yet. The deadline is completely unfair. I was emotional. I was manipulated. I was confused. I repeated back. Age can absolutely be used as a weapon against an older woman, not necessarily by changing the actual fact, but simply by suggesting to everyone around her that she is no longer capable of understanding them. I slid copies of the title confirmation, the attorney correspondence, the sale documents, and the formal notice across the table toward him. I understood every single page, I said. Bud, you should try reading them sometime. He did not touch a single one. For almost 2 weeks after that, he moved back and forth between anger and forced charm. One morning he brought me tea and called me mommy, a word he had not used since he was maybe 6 years old. That same evening he accused me of single-handedly destroying his marriage. His wife eventually asked whether I would help cover the cost of a storage unit. No, I said, not cruelly. Just simply, no. The word felt strange in my mouth at first, and then it felt completely natural. At 11:20 on a Saturday morning, my son set a printed list of moving expenses down on the kitchen counter. Truck rental, security deposits, storage fees, a week of hotel costs, furniture delivery. He had circled the total in red pen. You caused all of these expenses, he said. No, I said. Built an entire future around property you never actually owned. He stared at me like I had shouted, though I had barely raised my voice at all. This is the part nobody ever warns mothers about ahead of time. Once you finally stop rescuing an adult child from every consequence, that child may very well describe the simple absence of rescue as a personal act of cruelty against him. I paid for none of it. A week before the move, my old friend Marjorie, who I had known since our children were in the same kindergarten class together, called me on the phone just to talk. Blunted. She asked how I was holding up, and I found myself telling her, for the very first time out loud, the whole story from the very beginning. The locked door, the laminated schedule, the whispered conversation about the deed that I was never supposed to hear. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line, and then Marjorie said quietly, Eleanor, you did not do anything to that family. You simply stopped letting them do something to you. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up, turning it over the way you might turn over a smooth stone found on a beach. My new home turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom cottage with wide, level sidewalks, a small community library 2 blocks away, a maintenance service included in the monthly fee, and no stairs anywhere inside it. Bedroom there was noticeably smaller than my old one, which honestly made me laugh out loud the first time I measured it. The real difference, I realized, was choice. A small room that you choose freely for yourself is simply comfort. A small room that is assigned to you by someone else in order to diminish you is a box. Yes, they box. Neatly labeled and sealed shut by somebody else's hands. At 3:45 on moving day, the very last truck finally pulled away from the curb. My son stood alone in the empty living room. Wood, and beneath layers of fresh paint, you could still faintly see the pencil lines marking his childhood height on the kitchen door frame. He reached out and touched one of the lines with 2 fingers. For just a moment, he looked exactly like the boy I remembered raising. Wood, are you really going to let this be the end for us? He asked quietly. My chest tightened painfully. I wanted more than anything to cross that empty room, hold him the way I used to when he was small, and quietly repair everything between us. That instinct does not simply vanish just because it has become genuinely dangerous to act on it. But love and access are not the same thing, and forgiveness has never once been the same thing as a key to my front door. I am letting letting this be the end of how you treated me, I told him. Would. He looked down at the bare floor and said nothing else. No real apology ever came. Not that day and not afterward. His wife called to him from outside the front door, and he turned and followed her voice without looking back at me again. At 4:10 that afternoon, I locked the front door of that house for the very last time and handed my set of keys over to Vanessa. The new owner arrived shortly afterward with her young daughter, and I overheard them discussing where exactly to plant rose bushes along the front walkway. I did not feel any sense of defeat watching the two of them walk through that door together. I felt light, genuinely light. There was no dramatic collapse afterward, no headline-worthy ending. My son and his wife eventually rented a modest apartment across town and quietly built their own separate life there. That ordinary outcome became the only consequence I ever needed, the only quiet justice I still occasionally allow myself to call it. At 7:12 in the morning, exactly 1 month to the day, after he first demanded my bedroom, I sat beside the window of my new little cottage with a fresh cup of tea warming my hands. My husband's photograph stood facing outward on the shelf across the room, and this time nobody had moved it. I found myself remembering my son's exact words from that terrible morning. If you cannot adjust, maybe you should find somewhere else to live. He had meant those words as a threat, and instead, quietly, they became the best advice anyone gave me all year. I found somewhere else. Not because I was pushed out against my will, but because I finally understood fully and completely that ownership has never really been just a name printed on a deed. It is the right to decide exactly what enters your home, what leaves it, and what kind of behavior will never again be allowed to stay. At 75 years old, I did not lose my family home that year. I simply sold a building. What I carried away with me instead was worth infinitely more. My own voice, my own peace, and every single remaining year of my life, but still mine, completely and entirely mine.